How's it going, everyone? This is Wimbo. In this video, I'm going to share some of my pro content in my upcoming course, which is called Master Texturing in Blender 3.2. Currently, I'm actually producing and recording this course for you guys. And this course is going to be separated by two major parts. One is the part talking about the concept and the principles, how to do texturing. And the other part is basically to producing case studies to really dive deep case by case and texture by textures to really finding the best solution to doing the textures inside Blender. I know you guys will love this course, and I cannot wait to share all of you guys for this exciting course. And right now the courses haven't finished yet. Once it's been officially released, I will put in more details in the description sections, which you can go to check it out on Gumroad. Before that, just please be patient and enjoy part of this course content on YouTube. One of the biggest challenges for artists to learning any new concept, new tools to creating the visual art is the terminology. It's about the language that between the different software and different medias, and we're trying to collaborating and to really creating something fresh and new. So for photographers or graphic designer to transfer into 3D world, a lot of times their terminologies are a little bit different. So before we really dive deep in the texturing, I really want to spend some time to go over some concept and stuff that we are going to need to understand before we're really doing actual work to doing the texture. So the beginning with, we need to understanding these two terms. Basically, think about this. This is kind of a sheet of skin or a cover to actually being using the scissors to cut it open and make it flat. Process of getting the 3D model surface into 2D to become a texture. This is called UV unwrapping. That's the process, and this is actually called UV map. This is the classic illustration of a cube and being open it up and UV unwrap into here. In the reality, unfortunately, it's not working like that. It's much more complicated. This is the UV map that we are going to see once we actually UV unwrap a human head model. So it looks a little bit weird because proportionally in the some of ear areas we have to really cut it off and really getting flat them, and there's quite kind of creases in the between there. It's quite of a challenging process for photographers and the graphic designer to really understand, because we're comfortable to working with the environment that consists with 2D. We're trying to creating depths to make it look like 3D. So that's what the photography is about. The actual 3D world, this can be challenging to understand. But as long as you know what is the UV unwrapping does, it just transfer 3D to 2D. This is the very first step, okay? So the next step we want to talk about is the layer concept. If you are a graphic designer, if you're a photographer, you know what layer means. Basically, it just means different components to really combine together. Layer is really our language and terminology so that we can quickly understand. There are color layers, there are metallic layers, roughness layers, and in the 3D world, they are calling maps. But for our photographers or graphic designers, we understand these are just layers. And when we combine together into one, merge together, and that's the final texture we are going to see. Sometimes it's within the lighting information, sometimes don't. So I will talk about it later. So now you guys see, oh, we are speaking the same language anyway. And this is well demonstrations talking about what is the actual layers talk about. This is the textures. That's the wooden feeling. You can see the highlight from the light. You can see the shadow areas. You can see the texture and feel. And that's actually combined within different maps. These are the layers in the 3D world. So once you understand that the maps, it just means layers, that's much easier to really understanding what we have done here. We break down the complex textures into a layer concept. So that's what we converting from 2D to even into layers. So that's very important. Now let's go to the next step. The next step is called layer mask concept. Oh wow, layer mask. How familiar with this can be either photographers or graphic designers, that you know how layer mask works and layer concept. For those of you who doesn't familiar with layer mask, I just want to quickly go over some basic concept of a layer mask. So for layer mask, it basically is a black and white mask, and it is cover and review parts of the layer. So in the layer mask, basically whatever is showing black is going to hiding the certain part of the layer, and the showing white is going to review certain part of the layer, and if you have a gray, it's going to be in between the partially showing the layer. So how do we do that inside Blender? Is this is a tiny thing right here is being highlighted, and because inside Blender when we're creating a textures, we're going to use sort of some mix shader or mix RGB to really mixing each layers. So that's the critical or very important concept to building layers inside Blender. Okay, so that's what we call FAC, or factor in short. This is the place to plug in the layer mask, which oftentimes it can be a mask node, or it also can be a black and white images. Okay, so now let's get into an example inside Blender. And now we're inside Blender, and as you can see here, here's a plane, and a very simple plane, and we are under in the shading tab. And you don't actually need to do a whole lot right now, but you might not really quite understanding this how this program works. I will explain the nodes in the details in the further case study parts of in this tutorials. Right now, we don't have any material input inside this shader, so it doesn't really working, and you wouldn't be able to see it. Well, what I can do here, I can hold Control and Shift and click on this principal BSDF, which is actually showing the red color, and is well connect with the materials, and is making the material look in red according to the texture setup we have creating. And the other one is exactly same, it's different color, and I hold Control Shift click, and it's going to be yellow. Okay, so what we can do here for layers, we can basically just think about these two color textures as two different layers. One is in the top, the other one is in the bottom. So it doesn't really matter about the orders. But if we want to do a layer mask, we can control certain parts being reviewed, certain part to being covered. What we can do, we can using a black and white image as a mask. As you can see here, this is the image mask that we're creating. If I holding Control Shift and click, you will see this is just my business logo, and you will see we have black and white, and also some kind of gray color, and as some kind of gradients as well. This is something you can easily create inside Photoshop or Illustrators, whatever apps that you want to creating, it can be using as a map. And remember how this thing works. The white part is going to review, the black part is going to cover. All right, so what we can do here, if I'm going to using the mix shader right here, the mix shader, I'm going to mix these two. Okay, and just hook these two in. So we call these noodles, these are the nodes. And basically what we're seeing here, we're mixing these two together by a factor. And right now, as you can see here, this is not a pure yellow, this is not a pure red either. So this is kind of like a general mix. It doesn't really give you some sort of a reason or a way to mix, just by using a factor 50 by 50. So that's what's going on now. So if we are going to link or hook this mask into the factors, and then suddenly you will see, oh, so my name is being showing, but it's not showing black and white, it's showing red and yellow. So that's how it works. And also remember, the white part is the part that being reviewed, and the black part is being covered. Interesting, I wanted to mention that, as you can see here, the white part is supposed to be review, which means the layer on the here is supposed to be on the top of the other one. It may a little bit, this might sound a little bit confusing because in our Photoshop or Illustrators, when we're having a layer underneath, that's the layer is going to be staying below the other one. However, inside Blender, it is kind of opposite. if you're thinking this way as a graphic designers or a photographers, this is a little bit backward, but it doesn't really matter. If I'm just kind of change the different locations, you can really easy to adjusting these. Understanding how to using layer mask inside the Blender is very critical to building complex texture. After seeing the examples inside Blender, we finally getting a conclusion is the layer mask really is a black and white map that helps mix and blend different layers. After understanding this concept, it just makes so much easier for photographers and the graphic designers to understanding how to building textures inside Blender in 3D software in general. So we will go to the next part is going to talk about the texture concept. There are two major concepts of building layer based textures. This is diffuse or albedo. So these are two type of methods, and they're also all using the layers and concept very similar. However, the major differences between these two methods is the lighting information. Albedo methods building the textures, we usually do not include any lighting informations. So there are good things and bad things. So think about this. If you're building a texture that doesn't include lighting information, that actually will be much easier to really transferring into a different lighting scenarios that is still going to perform the way it's supposed to be. But with the diffuse based texturing method, that we have to really put in lighting into consideration. But the majority of the stuff we are going to focusing on here is going to be done inside Blender. Albedo based texturing usually get it done in other 3D softwares like Adobe 3D Substance Painter and other softwares. But we are not going to cover these things. But one thing I really want to point it out is that for the texturing part, Blender is not be able to do an albedo process. But that's not a bad thing for Blender because it's open source and a lot of people can really learn it to getting started. But if you're really gonna dive deep to working professionally and getting more complicated textures to creating, you're probably gonna go to the path of you wanna go to the professional texturing software to work as a professional. So for the rest of the course, we are going to focusing on the how to do materials inside Blender. Next part, we are going to talk about the PBR and also procedural. So PBR is stand for physically based rendering. It actually using different maps, and like we're showing, or we think about layers and maps, we're using maps and also is fixed. Once you have the certain maps and your texturing performance, everything is going to be fixed. You don't have whole lot room to really change that, but we do have some room to do it. But the good news is it can be used across multiple 3D softwares. That's why PBR texture is very popular nowadays to be used by professionals, because it's really good materials that you can quickly use it using maps and have really good decent result. The procedural textures is basically using certain math, using numbers, and it can be very flexible. Think about the procedural is just talking about one way of doing a texturing. It is using math and to really calculating generating certain patterns through that way to really creating a texture that looks nice. Sometimes it can be photorealistic, but sometimes it's not that photorealistic. But the challenge is it cannot directly transfer to other 3D software. We will have a lot of more case study to explain the differences and also showing what's going on here. I just want to put these concepts at the front, really, and let you understand that you can certainly do some research yourself to study a little bit more, but these are the major differences and the pros and cons for these two approach when you're building textures inside Blender. Now let's go to the PBR maps. We are going to understanding how many maps and what kind of maps that we have. We have color map, roughness, normal, metallic, displacement, bump map, reflections, diffuse, gloss, ambient occlusion, and height, and more and more. You know, this is exactly how I feel when I know I need to understanding all these maps to just learning simple textures. I'm just a photographer why do I need to learn all these? Oh, it's so tough to get into 3D. But matter in fact, it is not that much. As you can see here, the maps names being highlighted in red, these are the little more important maps that we can use inside Blender. And once you organize this, it's getting actually simpler and easier, and we're just gonna go for that. Another one I just created, kind of trying to give you a little bit visual connections. As you can see here, I'm using a kind of color coded to representing each maps. So the color maps obviously can be a color, need to be colorful. And the normal map usually is a purplish map, so you will see that. And the height map, roughness map, and bump map, and metallic and displacement map, usually there are black and white maps. And whatever inside this red box, they're actually functioning a little bit similar. My priority is, if I have a normal map, I'm going to use the normal map first. If I don't, then I'm going to think about using the bump map. If I still don't have even bump map, then I will use displacement map. So basically, all you really need to understanding in total is 5 maps. This is the whole idea of this course. I'm trying to make the complicated texturing process as simple as it can be to let you to really understanding the texturing, and that you can build the complex textures based on these simple, easy understanding concept using layers and using maps. Now let's get into some examples inside Blender. As you can see here, we already have something built. This is just kind of wooden textures. All these textures are provided from the polygon.com. As you can see here, these are the maps. I'm just gonna do Control Spacebar to really demonstrating how these. So this is color maps, roughness map, normal map, and the displacement map. And you can see here, once we plug these in into Principal BSDF, this is just super easy to generating a texture that we want. We can utilizing this, and this is called PBR approach. We are really doing a lot of exercise in the case study, really show you how to do these inside Blender. We have talked about PBR textures quite a bit, and using the maps and using understanding through layer concept. Now let's talk about the procedural texture inside Blender. Here's an example of procedural texturing. As you can see here, this is the a brow pencil that I built, and I'm using 100% procedural texture on here. You can see here we have different colors, we have different textures and the different layout in here. This is all done using math, using numbers. Okay, so if you can see here, this is the procedural nodes right here. It looks very complicated. It's kind of annoying to build it. It's time consuming, and it does. And also, this is one of the reasons that I'm not really a big fan of procedural, because although it's very flexible, you can really tweaking things, numbers in here, each numbers, but it takes time to really kind of building this by this. But good thing is, when you even doing procedural, you're still using the layer mask concept to really kind of building layer by layer, eventually having a complicated textures finish. But this is something that you can possibly done it just simply using a math in numbers. So I just want to show you what is the procedural means. There are 0 image texture used, but there are some like existing textures that we can possibly use and to creating some patterns pretty quickly. Okay, and we will definitely do more practice in the case study and in the later of the course. And as you can see here, we have some existing textures. Although it's called textures, but it's all math based. It's not real images textures. They're just numbers. Remember this, Musgrave, and we use a wave textures. We also using some grading textures. There are a bunch of these. These are the built-in textures inside of Blender, but they are considered as node textures. And that's just something that I want to quickly just chat about it. There's a major ones. You can go to the textures, you will see a list of these, and the major one is just going to be brick and Musgrave, noise, Voronoi, and the wave. This is not a procedural texturing course, and I'm not really a fan of procedural texture either, but I just want to point it out what existing. We will use some existing Blender texture nodes when we're building some practice textures in a later case study, but I just want to point it out. Okay, So now let's go back to the PBR and the procedural. So what is the really PBR is good at? It's good at photorealistic texturing. It's physically based rendering. It's really reflecting the texture results like the real products and under the real light. And also it is very easy to use. You're just gonna plug in the maps to really creating texture. That's it. Another thing is when you're dealing with complex textures like wood or organic textures, the best way to go, the solution is going to be PBR, because if you're going to creating these textures through the math, the numbers, that's going to be very challenging and time consuming. And on the other hand, the PBR texture is going to cost some money and to purchase on certain website. If you're beginners or just doing 3D for fun, you probably don't want to invest money to purchase all these PBR maps. But that just depends on your financial goals and also your career goal. On the other side, the procedural textures, you can actually creating some really creative textures in using the procedural, because it doesn't have to be photorealistic, and it's really fun to program rather than to really just getting everything looks like a real one. And this can be a lot of time I using procedural, I quickly creating some very simple textures, and it costs zero money to program on your own. And the additional benefit is you can even using the procedural textures doing other type of animations when you're doing motion graphic. Okay, so these are just the pro and cons. Very last pro tips is to creating texture wisely. If you don't have money, just go practicing to getting something really good at from the procedural way. If you have some money to spend, purchasing some really popular textures and good quality PBR maps to really creating the textures that works very well for your product renders and quickly getting the result. Because sometimes time is money on your side. It's not only about the skill, how much depth you want to go for each path. It's all about most cost effective and save your time. This is everything I want to share in this video, and I will see you in the next one. If you enjoyed this video, please hit likes and subscribe, and also leave comments to let me know what kind of topic that you want me to including in the case study. I really want you guys to get involved and get into the process when you're creating this type of course content, because it's eventually going to benefit you the most. If there are some certain textures that you really want to know more and be including in this pro course, please let me know in the comments, and I will try my best to get a good case study for you for this course. And thank you for watching. I will see you in the next video. Bye.